we met on November 12th at 6 o'clock, and the purpose of our meeting was to consider options or processes for ordinance enforcement. Ahead of time I sent you the minutes from that meeting, and then also the recommendations that we had from that meeting. I think I'll just read those because I'm not, even though they're here, I don't think probably people in the audience have seen them. The meeting was called, so the present were David Lanehart and Beth Wheeler, the board representatives, Lori Fisher, Mary Miller, Jim Dooley, Mary Poker, Allison Ward, who was videoing, Brent Hartman, Amanda Hartman, Child, and Lauren Morley. The meeting called to order at 6 p.m. Beth stated that the purpose of the meeting was to develop ideas for effective and appropriate ways and processes for the full Jamison Board of Trustees to consider as they determine what is most appropriate for our community. First, Beth asked each person present if enforced properly, do you support Jamison's ordinances and their enforcement? The comments to that question included, if we have them, we need to make them work. If we're not going to enforce them, then do not have them. Need to distinguish which ordinances relate to hazards and which relate to aesthetics. If there are some ordinances that need to be repealed, then they should be repealed. And what's the hurry? Why now? Number two, the suggestions or the comments in the meeting were, people should just tell the person directly involved rather than a hired person to patrol and trying to find violations. Third, one person had experience serving as an inspector of houses in a community the size of Gallatin, and that system worked well. 4, the small town cooperating board, which apparently is a cooperation board, is a problem. It allows the board to delegate the responsibility of actually selecting the wording of ordinances to a, quote, outside person, which may exceed the board's intent. 5, ordinances should be a framework, and force should only be used when constitutional rights are being violated. There was a sheet passed out dated November 7th, which was the alternate recommendations to the enforcement officer, and Lori and Mary then responded to questions about that. So on the back side, page 2, are the recommendations from the discussion. The first, the use of the term enforcer creates an us and them perception rather than a community approach. 2, do not hire anyone to patrol, identify, and process violations. For the 3, and there are 3 bullet points under that. Perception is that someone paid to patrol with the purpose of finding violations is compelled to find violations in order to meet the expectations of their employment. B, the concept of the board directing the paid enforcement officer to focus on particular violations requires that the board believes that violations exist. C, having a non-community resident rather than people from within the community is too intrusive and works against building and sustaining our community's strong positive relationships. Number 3, implement a complaint-based system within our community to helpfully interact with the owner of the issue to get resolved. Based on comments by some trustees at previous board meetings, few individual trustees are willing to engage personally in enforcement. Non-trustee, unpaid volunteers could be included in the complaint-based process implemented by the board. One option would be to have a 3-person panel, including at least 1 trustee, to receive concerns and interact with the appropriate person or persons to resolve the issue or to determine there is not a violation or an issue. The Board of Trustees has more discretion than a judge would have, so issues are best resolved locally. The Board of Trustees would make any final decision to refer issues to the court if deemed necessary. Meeting adjourned at 7:15. That's our report. We'd be glad to field questions. Or David may want to say something. But
I think we covered the paper over well.
So, you have an opinion? What? I think our recommendation. Wouldn't you say this is our recommendation?
Yeah, exactly.
To go with a complaint-based system and
that was
not have an employed person to do it and patrol.
That was a general consensus, and I for one agree with that, with the complaint-based being better for the village this time versus an enforcement officer.
And whether you set up a panel and have people from the community, I think in the last minutes, Mrs. Brogue mentioned somebody, I think it was credited to her, something about a betterment person and I don't, about all that. So this board can decide how to structure it. We have to change our ordinances in order to be able to do that. But I think there's been enough discussion over this issue that we should make a decision and go.
I don't completely understand what they are asking us to do, or vote on, or approve or disapprove. this is what they discussed, and this is,
And then the second sheet says recommendations from the discussion. That's the second page
Okay.
on the back.
Basically, we want our enforcement officers, we want us to do this, make complaints and do everything.
And if it needs to go externally, then the board has that option of, you know, sending it on to court if it can't be resolved.
so we have nobody, no kind of, don't call it an enforcer, nobody,
We don't have an employee.
or anybody checking on anybody.
Right. But if you don't like that your neighbor hadn't got their grass or their weeds up against their house, then you bring that complaint and,
To the board,
well, or this panel, that's a decision that needs to be made. If you want to have a panel that includes volunteers, you know, a volunteer from the community and then a board member or, you know, something to help field those and then actually go and address them. Well, who's the best person to talk to that person about mowing their grass or cutting their weeds?
isn't that what we are supposed to be doing anyway, without another panel or something that we are supposed to be?
Well, that's fine with me, but that's not what we set up, that's not what's on the books now. What's on the books now is for the enforcement officer, hiring an enforcement officer to do all the things for us, and then bring it to us if that person can't get it resolved. That was my understanding of what the current ordinance says. And I think others have said, well, why don't we just do that, we're the board, but we didn't want to patrol and go out and enforce, and I think probably for the same reason that we wouldn't want somebody patrolling
What was
us.
the objection to having David be the person that people would come to, then he would come and talk to the board as a whole about what, and he said he would do it without pay, so there was no, we weren't paying him anything to do it, it was just somebody that, and if any of the board members saw anything, or anybody in the community saw anything that was amiss, they could come to David and tell him, and then he could.
Right, and I would still be a go-to person, but it won't,
Well, anyway.
not have basically not having an enforcement officer on patrol.
Yeah.
Where that was brought to,
Well, that sounds all right to me. I just didn't see any reason for creating another panel, another group or something other than the board, than the trustees.
I'm good with that.
So,
So basically, what we really want to do is if somebody has a complaint, just bring it to the board, we'll look into it.
Yeah.
yeah.
And I don't know, I mean,
Right.
I guess you can decide, do they need to wait, bring it to a board meeting, or do they bring it to a board member and say, this is an issue, and then that board
Well,
member
I
can
said you
say,
could just be that person. If they didn't want to wait till a board meeting, they could come and talk to him.
Or anybody, or any of us, I mean.
and if they brought it to you and you didn't want to deal with it, you could give it, you know, to David or whatever. Part of the deal is I don't want, a hazard, in my opinion, of the complaint system is to get somebody who's just gonna gritch all the time, to occupy all our time and to sabotage, you know, what we're trying to do to be a community, you know, working together. And so,
And then if we do not have a person that is checking on this or whatever, enforcement, or that's what you're calling it here, we do not have somebody there, what is the reason for having ordinances at all?
well, if
If
people.
we are not going to enforce them, or whatever you want to call it, that's a scary word.
Well, my response to that is, you would still have them, so if there are hazards out there, then complaints could be made, and then it would be enforced, if it is indeed a violation. And that just not saying, well, they painted their house green, and I don't like green, and so go get them. Well, we don't have any ordinance about painting houses green. But if they say they're, you know, whatever, some violation, they've got 6 abandoned vehicles parked on their lot, and there's a rule against that, you ought to enforce that, and if that is indeed one of the things and it's a violation, then the complaint committee or whomever would speak with them about that or follow through with getting that done. That's why I think we need ordinances. Now, you can decide whether we need all the ordinances we have or we need more ordinances than we have, but that's why I think we have ordinances, to identify those things so people sort of know the game rules, whether you're in or out of compliance.
And if we as a board have people come to us and say that they would like something amended or changed, well, then we can do that at any time. and change it, or if we see this isn't working right, or it's
Right,
being
that doesn't,
unfair.
this doesn't change any of that.
Okay.
I'm not sure where you want me to go with this. Just be
Madam
honest.
Chairman, may I ask a couple of questions just for clarity in terms of what's being said? As you're talking about a complaint-based system, are you referring to a formal written complaint or just a verbal complaint?
I believe it would need to be written and signed, but we didn't talk about that specifically.
Right.
But it's really, anybody can whine about something, but is that a complaint or not? I think it needs some kind of formality and paper trail.
Okay, and do you anticipate that once there is a complaint, that anyone would check to see if the complaint is valid?
Sure, that's
Oh,
the
yeah.
first stop.
And who would do that? How would you anticipate that? I mean, I would have thought that would have been David if he was the point person. But if you don't have anyone to do it, then it's not fair to the person being complained about. You know, you can't just act on a complaint without first checking to see if
Right.
there's a real problem.
Right.
So who's gonna do that and how?
Well, I think, well, you can ask, I think
Well, that's-
some
that's-
appointments are gonna have to be made.
Right, and that's what I think we were talking about as far as me volunteering as the acting board member to go and address what that problem was, and then with a written complaint, bring it in front of the board and discuss it if there
And
was.
if David couldn't do it, or if he felt that he needed to take another board member with him, well, that would be all right. Or if he couldn't do it at all for some reason or other, then another board member could. Is that
We'd
right?
just be a committee of the whole, sort of.
Okay.
We'd still be a committee as a
We're-
whole,
we're
but there'd be a
a
point person, there'd be a
Yeah.
point person
Right.
instead of a hired official, and we as in the past, govern ourselves as a village and as neighbors and so on.
And I just have one more question. If, you've mentioned several times, some situations with out-of-town property owners, and I don't know what they are, but, are you including in the complaint-based system the board as a possible complainer? The board itself, to deal with those things that, I mean, you know,
Because, yeah, I understand what you're saying.
if you understand the question.
So if the board has a concern about some piece of property that's in violation, can we say we want to go do that? Is that what you're
I
saying?
think that's what I'm asking. Can the board be the complainer? Whether written and signed or discussed in a meeting and in the minutes, however you.
I would certainly say yes to that, but we didn't address that in here, but I think that's open for discussion. I don't know why it wouldn't be. No.
I don't think it'd have to be, yeah.
Would be fine.
Thank you.
More discussion?
Thank you.
So do we want to, I don't know what you want me to do. Do you want to vote on this? Do you want to appoint someone or go along with it?
Well,
I'm in the dark here.
Well, my suggestion for a process anyway would be to reconcile this with what we have currently in the ordinances, so some of them are probably gonna have to be repealed or amended, and language with this intent need to be replaced in that. That'd be my thinking. If we're going to make it official, we need to repeal what's on there or amend it to convey this. Does that seem like, I mean, is there another way to do that besides,
In other words,
Sure, can I-
eliminate
can I-
the ordinance enforcer and say point person.
or whatever, yeah?
I really do think it's a good idea to, because I know you're steering away from the panel, but I think it's a good idea to have an additional panel, like was originally mentioned, to having someone out of the Embetterment Committee, someone out of this board, and then maybe one other neutral person, because that's going to take away possibly any discrimination. It's going to take away any possibility of people focusing on this board, saying, well, they're just out to get us. If it's made up of several boards, I think you would have a more fair shot of it being, people not zoning in on it quite so much.
So let me see if I said that back. So you think that by having a broader panel,
Yeah,
people not including people who are not elected to this
Yes.
board, on it, would eliminate the perception of the board picking on someone?
yes,
Well, it's the board who's eventually going to have to decide whether it's a violation or not, right?
Yeah.
And so whether a panel reviews it first and brings it or doesn't bring it, I don't know how that's eliminated, how that risk is eliminated of being think they're picked on. I mean, if the same neighbor keeps saying you're doing something wrong, and that's what keeps coming to us, whether you have a panel or not panel, and if you indeed are violating something,
But can't the
we're gonna pick
panel?
on you.
But can't the panel eliminate? I mean, the panel is going to stop it before it gets to you guys. I'm just thinking. I'm not thinking of the person. I'm thinking of the boards. So if you have a person that keeps coming in and saying, "Oh, my neighbor won't mow their lawn. My neighbor won't mow the lawn. My neighbor won't mow the lawn." A, that's not going to eat up your time as a board because it's going to stop the panel before it gets there, before it ever gets to you. It's not ever going to become your issue. So, because the panel's going to step back and deal with the issue without it ever having to come to you. But if there's an issue that the panel can't resolve, so they've gone out and they've talked to a legitimate safety concern or whatever it is, and that person is not willing to comply, then that issue would come to you so that you could take it to a possible legal status or whatever needs to be done at that point in time.
I think I understand the distinction now, and I guess, because I think you're saying that if we didn't have that panel and it came directly to the board, that the board would only either say it's a violation, you're out of here. What my perception is that the board, who has members of Betterment on it and who, are citizens, would actually work with them to try and get them into compliance, and to get them into compliance, much like I think you're describing that the panel would do. And so it's sort of, you're thinking that having the panel assures. One of the things I think can happen with the panel when they're not accountable to the voters is they drag their feet. It doesn't seem important and it's not a big deal. And so then folks say, well, I gave it to the panel and the board owns the panel and how come nothing's happened on this? And if we're going to be blamed for it, I sort of think we ought to have some oomph to, see that it isn't just, ignored. I'm not saying, I'm not arguing against it, I just think it's a caution.
Maybe just a related question. It sounds like what Robert is saying would be that you'd be giving the panel the authority to make some final decisions. That's a tiny bit questionable.
Yeah, I'm not recommending that. I'm not recommending a final decision other than to say, you having trouble mowing your yard, you need weed eater broken?
Yeah.
Can we come help you with that?
I know.
I think you can offer suggestions to get compliant, but I don't think they get to just say that.
Whether it comes to the board or not. It would be
Yeah.
like telling them, okay, it's up to you if it gets to the board.
Maybe
That's
not
not.
what you think.
Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. I just think are we not creating redundancy if we have another panel?
Well, it could be. I can see both ways. If you got a board member on it and two people who are not on the board, and perhaps someone who's not on the board has a better relationship with the person, or it could be the person filing the complaint that wants to talk to the neighbor and try and get it straightened out. If there's but it doesn't preclude the board, not having that doesn't preclude the board from saying, well, I'll talk to such and such because they're buddies and, maybe we can figure out how to do this and not just we're the board and we're coming to tell you that you've done this. I think that's what we're trying to get away from, is that authoritarian, do it or we're going to get you, but can we help you? And is there, if you're just going to say, heck no, then we're going to say, well, then we're going to have to say, get tougher, but that's not what we want to do.
Madam Chair, I'm just wondering if the panel or the board has considered an alternative of having a group of citizens whose purpose would be to assist people in the community rather than having them be between the board and the citizen if they have a complaint, but a group that like Betterment is ideally suited for this, what I'm asking about. To if someone has problems, let's say you have an elderly person or a person who's been ill or whatever, and things are getting a little out of hand, maybe you could have a group of citizens who would go out and assist, go out and offer. I mean, you can't just do it. They'd have to offer, and the people would have to accept it, would have to want it. But has anybody considered that alternative?
That's what I think the panel does, is to try and match up the people who can help in the community with the person who has the need.
Yeah, and see, that's not what I'm hearing, nor what I see here. But I understand what you're saying. If that's what you're thinking, then that's a whole different, it's a whole kind of different thing.
I don't know the answer.
It sounds to me like if this panel was, and maybe this is what Lucille is saying too, that if we have a panel that are for lack of a better word to say, that are peacemakers, or troubleshooters, or something, whatever you wanna call it. That when there is complaints, that they are there to go out and help the person who somebody is complaining about, and say, what can we do to help you?
Well, community assistance, it would be a community assistance.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, sometimes the reason a person's yard is not done, or this is not done, people will automatically assume they don't wanna do it. Sometimes it's because they can't.
That's right.
There's a lot of things John can't do right now. And and the ditch gets high, people are gonna assume John's lazy, but it's not, because it's because John can't use the weed eater, or David can't mow. People need to stop and ask the question, do you need help, before we wanna assume they're just a bad person that doesn't care about their property.
So who do you
And is there-
decide is on this board?
I think you have to appoint, I mean, the board's gonna own it. The board's gonna own it, so you need to, and if you want somebody, I mean, the suggestion has been someone from Betterment and somebody who's not an elected person in the town, I think is what that original thing we talked about.
And if you are considering that, have you considered the possibility that it might be better to go out and offer that help before you have a written complaint? I mean, you know.
Well, I think we do that as a community already, but the way I was saying is, as a volunteer, is that I would go to Betterment or other places and find the help versus setting up another group,
Right,
another
exactly.
One of the things is about whether,
meeting.
there are people who may not be perceived as being in violation, or if there's in violation, their neighbors don't care, or anybody driving by doesn't care. And so then if this happy committee that goes and assists them, which I'm in favor of happy assistive committees, says, well, you only need to clean up this junk. And they're thinking, well, the hell you say? I have to clean up this junk. What are you talking about? And so then that isn't very happy, helpful. And so that's why waiting for the complaint and then verifying that the complaint is indeed a violation of the ordinance seems to me to be a better, happier way to handle
You
things.
might be right.
Rather than going out to somebody and say, we see that you are in violation of such and such an ordinance, and rather than that, if you see a violation, you go out and help them, take care of it. I mean, you would just be good neighbors.
Yeah, I guess that's more what I was thinking, is just the offer to go out and just say, I see that you might need some help mowing your lawn. Can I help you?
And I guess I think we do that. We
I
don't need to,
think
we
we
don't
already-
codify that in our ordinances to
I
say
think we're
everybody's
already-
gonna go out and be nice to their
No,
neighbors.
no.
I think
That's
we already
right.
do that, but I think also you need to turn around and look at the opposite end of the spectrum. I live across from the Joyce's abandoned property. We could add ordinances to the ordinances to cover that mess over there. And then there's kids over there playing and this and that and getting hurt and in wells and yada yada. Those are the real issues we have, not helping shovel your walk or
Right.
weed eating for John or whatever, because I think we're all there for each other. The real problems are the abandoned properties.
That's right.
And I think this would let us address them by having a
I
complaint and
agree.
going through the process. And, and again, there have been lots of contacts made by various organizations and individuals to try and help them, but
They don't want to.
but this would be a process, then that would be
They would have
official
to.
and would result in
I
something.
mean, they're just an example, but
What do you wanna do? Do you wanna?
I don't think people in this community are all naturally mean and ornery and cantankerous. I think that this is a wonderful community, and I think that we ought to act more like that and be peacemakers and work with each other and help each other and just be good neighbors. We do need to go through the rules. There are rules. There has to be rules, and we have to obey the law and different things like that. But we need to be more kind.
I think
Do you
we
think
are,
this
but
gets-
unfortunately, there are people that no matter how kind you are, they don't want your help.
Right, there's some, that's right. So
Few and far between, but they're there.
I guess my recommendation is that if we want to adopt this in theory or whatever, and then ask to have the ordinances reviewed and amended and bring back language that does that. So repeals the ones that we want repealed and puts in the stuff we want in. But again, we're gonna have some, are we gonna have a panel, 3-person, 2 people not on the board? Those decisions need to be given, so the direction, the person writing it, and whether you're going to have a board member write it, you're gonna ask, the seal to write it, or what we're gonna do. But that's what I think is the next step. That's my suggestion. Let's move it along.
If if you decide to have a separate panel, I will offer my services to be on there since I'm not on any other committees.
I think Beth has a handle on it, and I think that, I don't know why it needs to go outside. She's pretty much knows it. She could come up with that, and you can vote on it, because she's been very involved and very conscientious about hearing all the sides and doing that. And I think if she wanted to make some adjustments and then you guys could vote on it, I think that's my vote. I vote for Beth.
Not quite what you wanted to hear, I bet.
Do we wanna wait until Natalie's here to decide anything, or do we wanna go ahead?
Well, I would just, that's a great question. And I think since if we are gonna move to the drafting estate, we're really not agreeing to anything. And so she would be here to see what we've come up with. And if she says, well, I have a different idea, and we all say, yeah, that's a better idea, then we just change them again. I don't wanna preclude her, because I think she's got a lot to offer. And if I weren't here, I'd like you to wait for me, but I wouldn't expect you to wait for me to, stop everything and then just rehash this the next time, but to have us all have something to look at. Does that seem, I'm not trying to cut her out, but that's the right question, Patty, to ask. Thank you.
So do we just wanna table it until next meeting, or do we wanna just go ahead and start on it at least, or?
We should go study it out.
And study it out means write something or ponder it? Think or do? What does that mean?
It seems like the key decision that you need to make in order that anybody can draft anything is whether or not you want to have a separate panel, or whether you want the complaints to come directly to the board, or to David as the point person to the board. You can't really draft anything until you've decided that, because it's a significant difference in drafting.
And you don't want to have to change any ordinances or the words more than once.
Well, you can.
Well, you can, but it's time consuming and it's a lot of work.
So we could propose the language both ways, with a panel, without a panel, instead of waiting another month to decide that. Just draft it, both versions, and then it'd still be amended,
So for the minutes,
Let me know what you want.
yeah, how do you want it reflected in the minutes? Do you want at the next meeting you will present,
I'm not being asked to
options.
written this, is Mary nominating me and you all are voting according to because,
okay.
yeah, so I'll,
If you're willing to do it.
right. Well, I guess I would say that I will bring language with options including, a panel and board only, immediately directly to the board or something. I decide bring options for what this proposal is, and it'll include that. I don't know what you need in minutes, but that's what I do. Because I just want us to move this along and get us
Right.
off this.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're wasting a lot of time on this.
Learn daylight,
Is that all right with everyone?
Yeah.
and you're gonna help me, right?
Sure.